Welcome to the Nobody Listens podcast. I'm Ruven.
I'm Maddie.
And this week, and also next week, because it's a thick book, we're gonna be talking about The Neverending Story by Michael Ende. Before we get into that, I say Michael because he's a German author. You weird British and American people, and also Australian and other people, would say Michael. But it's spelled Michael. He said it as Michael, so I'm gonna say Michael. But when we get into it, we will use the English names of the characters, so not to confuse all of you, because more people will have read an English translation than the
British
original.
people, Americans, Australians, and other people.
Yeah, other people.
Other people. That was a great move. Do you know the English names?
I do, and if I don't, I'm just gonna ask you for them. One I know, well, mostly they didn't change a lot of the names, but one they changed is the name of the dragon, which is Falkor in the English translation. It's Fuchur in the original, spelled Fuchur. And they changed
I can see
that
why they changed that.
apparently as to be confused with the word future. I don't think that's the reason why they changed it. I think they changed it because...
Immature joke.
Yeah, and because no one who speaks English as their first language can pronounce the CH correctly, and they would pronounce it as a CK, and then it would be something else. So that is why they changed it to Falkor. You've read half the book for the first time. We are doing the book in two parts, as I said, because the book changes a lot in the middle when a big thing we will get to later happens. So you've read the first half of the book for the first time now in the past
I have, and you've read
days.
it several times, right?
Yeah, I've read it once as a kid, once as a teenager, and now as an adult. Because apparently I am an adult now, even though I'm more childish than I ever was, honestly.
You're only an adult on the outside.
Yeah, I'm only an adult on paper. But yeah,
What
this is
about me then?
Same. But this is one of the books that changes a lot, depending on how old you are when you read them. This was a very different experience from the last time, which was a very different experience from the first time.
So this is about a boy of about 10, 12 who has a difficult time at school with bullying, for instance, and not fitting in, not having friends. He has a really tough time, and as is detailed quite early on, his mother died of an illness, and from then his relationship with his father has been, how do I put it, very, very non-committal, not very engaged, and so he feels very isolated in his life. And one day he goes to a bookstore, and the bookseller refuses to sell him anything, but he sees this book in the corner, and he just has to have it. And I will come back to this point later. And so he steals the book, and then he goes back to his school and hangs out alone in the gym area, and he starts to read this, and
In the attic, isn't it?
Weren't there mats in there?
Yeah, there are mats in there because someone brought them up. There are old mats in there. It's not the gym area because people would actually use it. It's the attic.
Okay, well, I stand corrected. It was the attic. And we will get further into what happens once he starts reading this.
Otherwise, what a fucking gym would it be with like stuffed animals and candles in there?
Stuffed animals and candles.
Yeah, both are mentioned. He lights some candles and he gets scared
Stuffed
about
animals, candles, and mats. That sounds weirdly like a sex dungeon.
You are such a
Maybe less of the stuffed animals.
I mean, some people might be into that.
Some people are. It's just not my thing personally.
But it's certainly not a school gym. It's an attic. So he starts reading this book, which appears to be about a Tolkien-esque world, I'd say, which is getting destroyed by a Lovecraftian force called the Nothing. If that sounds like something you want to read, read it. Spoiler warning here. This is the beginning of the book. We'll get into spoilers from now on. But before
we are going to spoil everything from now on.
Yeah, we will. And if you've seen the movie and think you know everything, no you don't, the movie is stupid. It only covers the first half of the book like we will today, but we are a bit different from the movie. We are not stupid. Anyway, one thing I wanted to say about the main character, whose name we haven't mentioned yet, he's called Bastian, or Bastian, but I will pronounce it English so it fits in with the rest of what we say. So this kid Bastian, as you mentioned, he's a bit of an outsider.
Did you notice the pun in his name?
I didn't.
How would his last name be pronounced to a German?
Oh!
Did I break you?
Yeah, you did. So his last name is would be pronounced Bux in German, B-U-X, and I didn't notice that it's an English word. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah.
His middle name is, I found a kind of tenuous link reference with his middle name, but that will be in the second half.
All right.
Yeah.
What I found about his character is he's very much an outsider, but he's just so much an outsider that he isn't a part of any minority group. Did you notice that too?
I did. He's pretty much default.
Yeah, he's pretty much default.
There's nothing that would necessarily set him apart to face discrimination or anything. Possibly, there are references to his weight. I know how shit kids can be about that.
Yeah, but it's still not really being a minority member.
It's not, I guess. Well, the cause of the bullying is never really detailed so much.
No, not really.
There is one point about him hating climbing rope and everyone laughing at him because he's bad at sports. Those are the only things that are mentioned.
I think that, and he seems to be a bit of, a dreamer and maybe a bit slow with some things.
It goes to show how much value some kids seem to put on athletic competition. It can be a good thing when you're into sports, but it can be unhealthy as well.
And what some people, if you ask them about the main character when they've just seen the movie or have read the book ages ago, they mostly think he's like one of the smart non-sporty kids, but I think that is said by people who were the smart non-sporty kids back in school. And if you actually go back and read it, you see that he really kind of sucks at everything but making up stories.
Yep.
Anyway, should we get into the world that he's reading about, or one question?
Shall we start with some of the points I had to make about the first chapter, though?
You mean the prologue?
The prologue.
Sure.
At the bookstore. First, I see what he did with the names.
Yeah, the bookstore owner is Karl Konrad Kroyander, while the boy is Bastian Balthasar Books. So it's BBB and CCC. Or in the original German, Karl Konrad Kroyander was spelled with 3 Ks. They changed that for the English translation.
Why Coriander, though?
Why not?
Maybe the author is one of those people that just really hates coriander. Apparently that's the thing.
Really?
Yeah. Genetically,
I thought you were getting into explaining
it.
how coriander is a stoner thing.
One thing that fucks me up, when he picks up the book...
Yeah?
What was the book called?
The book is called The Neverending Story, just like the actual book is.
And they're like, so, I'm reading the book that he's going to be reading.
Yes.
Wait, no, this is a book about the... And then it just goes back and forth. It breaks you for a bit.
And that gets even worse later in the book.
When the twist comes.
Yeah, when...
It happens all over again.
I forgot about that. I forgot that happens.
That's the central fucking point.
Yeah, it's why the story is called that, I know, but there are so many central fucking points, as you put it in this book. About the names again, I had a literal shower thought. When I was just taking a shower a few minutes ago, the main character has 3 Bs, and this book actually won a prize, which is called, I kid you not, the Buxtehuder Bücherbulle. Or
See, I didn't even know
this. Yeah, that is not a prize made up for this book. That actually exists. Do you want to get into the fantasy world now?
Oh, I have one other thing to mention. there's a point where it says he had everything he could have wished for in terms of material goods,
Yes.
despite being more withdrawn from his father. This is another thing that leads me to believe the author was a stoner.
Why so?
Why bring up the vitamin pills?
I was kind of confused about that as well.
Are they
Also,
vitamin pills? Is that a euphemism?
thought about that was like on the Simpsons Millhouse Van Houten with his breathalyzer.
He had a 3-speed bicycle, an electric train, plenty of vitamin pills, 53 books, so on and so forth.
If you read that list, it's so apparent that it's like late 70s.
A hamster, an aquarium, a small camera, 6 pocket knives. I can see why you'd mention the other things, pets
Also,
and material goods, but vitamin pills.
Also, what do you need 6 pocket knives for?
Maybe for scraping weed wax off greaseproof paper.
10.
He's 10 or 12.
Still, he's not even a teenager yet.
Maybe he started early.
Or maybe you have a bit of a one-track mind, well, a two-track mind. So what is, I'm gonna ask this sounds like a stupid question, but I know there are different translations of the word's name in English. The book translates it as Fantastica, right?
Yes.
So when Bastian actually starts to read about Fantastica, it starts with a few people of very, very, very different shapes and sizes going to the ivory tower to get a message to the ruler of this world, who is at that point called the childlike empress.
Does the use of ivory tower have anything to do with the figurative connotation?
I think so, because it's used like that in German as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is used like that.
The other thing I found remarkable about this world is that in most fantasy worlds, you will have species who have a lot of animosity to each other, different races at war, possibly a good side, a bad side, and so on and so forth. So typically you'll get, say, elves and dwarves and whatnot, good, might be some animosity within, trolls and orcs, bad, like that.
Yeah.
That's not the case in this world.
No, everyone seems to... Well, there are people who are fighting with each other on an individual basis, but there is no war between the different groups of people. We actually open on a giant rock biter and...
With a stone bike.
With a stone bike, yeah. Who later eats that bike because
I was
he
about
got
to say
yeah.
he's hungry and he just eats it. This is
why.
another reason I think the author was a stoner.
And he meets up with a few other creatures. Can you say what they are? Because I don't know how it was translated.
How was it translated? A night hob. One of them was translated as literally a tiny.
Oh, that is a shitty translation. So night hob is a good translation. I think it's Nachtalb in German. And Nacht means night. And Alp is related to elf. It's the word Albtraum, nightmare. But it also means like elf or goblin. So night hob as in hobgoblin and, night. That is a good translation for Nachtalb. But tiny for Winzling, which means tiny person, no, that's not a good translation.
We don't have rock biters in this one. They're rock chewers.
Rock chewers, alright.
That's even funnier.
Yeah, in the German one, it's Felsenbeißer.
That sounds like a great insult.
I kinda assumed it was Rockbiter when I read Felsenbeißer. My head just turned that into Rockbiter.
Because that's what it means, right?
Yeah, it is. So all those people are sent by their village or country or whatever to go to the Ivory Tower and tell the childlike empress that their world is being attacked by this force called the Nothing. Which is one of the parts where I think that this thing would be unfilmable or unadaptable into anything else but a book. Because
I struggle with that.
How so? How would you
when
nothing?
the Nothing was described? Because I was thinking, on one hand, it's later described as if you're blind, but it clearly states when he first sees the nothing, that it's not like an empty space where he climbed up a tree and he saw the branches and leaves fading out into the
Can,
nothing.
can I stop you?
And yep.
You are talking about a he that we haven't introduced yet.
Oh shit, I am, aren't I?
Yeah. Make your point and then we'll introduce him.
Okay. So at one point we see the nothing described. The example given is at the top of a tree, which is being affected by this force. Towards the ends, the leaves and branches are fading into what's known as the nothing. And it was described as not being like an empty space, but still in that world, but also not like darkness. How do you conceive of this?
That is what I'm saying. You can't put this into any other medium than words. Maybe you could like turn it into a video game and have like a blue screen of death there and just a bunch of numbers, because that is where the game world ends. But you can't put it into a movie or a play or whatever, even though people tried.
It could work with the way game maps are designed. That's true.
But that is really the only medium you
This
could
would
adapt
actually
it.
make a great game.
It would.
You know any game developers? Let's get on this shit.
We might. We should learn and do this.
Let's get on this.
To everyone listening, this is not a promise, but we will try.
So, Fantastica is ruled by the childlike Empress, she's a being who appears to be a little girl, but she never ages. She's older than any other being on Fantastica because it's her existence that keeps the world in place. And, well, to say she rules it would be she doesn't put in place any laws.
She seems to be the
or
world.
anything of the sort. Yes. It's not that she rules the world, it's that she is the world. And
She seems to be more of a goddess than a ruler, actually.
yeah, as everything is in existence because of her, every living being in the world respects her. There's no, what's the word? She doesn't have any opposition.
Political turmoil?
Yeah, she doesn't have any opposition. There's no political turmoil.
Which might also be why we don't hear about any wars and shit. Because if the ruler of the world and apparently the deity of this world are the same person, and everyone believes in her because she's obviously there, the two biggest reasons to fight over shit, politics and religion, are kind of taken out of the picture.
Yes. And what happens is these three creatures that we mentioned earlier, out of all of them, one of them...
And this weird light creature.
And, yeah, so there's the... What was it called again? Night something.
By the way, the tiny on his racing snail arrives the first at the ivory tower, which I find telling about the later story of the book, that the one creature you would expect to arrive the last arrives the first, even though it's a tiny creature on a fucking snail.
And then the Nighthawk comes in on his bat to visit her, and then notices that although he thought they were the first to go and see her, there are representatives from every race, every race but one, as I'll come on to later, in Fantastica, come to visit the childlike Empress. So he wonders what's going on and discovers that she is very ill. And her illness, nobody can fathom what it is. All the best physicians have tried to figure it out, but they can't. And it seems to be that her illness is causing the force which is known as the Nothing, because it started when she fell ill.
And her illness can't be healed by any of the doctors from all over this endless world who came to heal her. And so she sends out her ambassador.
Mm.
What's he doing? He's an ambassador. Her ambassador, the
Centaur.
centaur. Do they call it a black centaur as well in the
Yes,
English?
I was going to
Good.
make a point of that.
Who is a black-skinned centaur with a zebra instead of a horse body, which I'm not sure about.
How so?
This is very
A zebra
clearly
is
meant to
basically
be.
a stripy horse.
Yeah, so this is clearly meant to be an African equivalent to the Greek centaur, right?
I was just about to say, where do you find zebras? And it says at some point that, like, furthermore, he was a black centaur. So the race is definitely being emphasized here.
It is.
I'd like to say I think that was possibly a good move, as in having someone in a position of such power, especially in the time this was written in, have it be a black person and without being patronizing.
Like
Make the
bring it up
intention
much.
clear. That's the thing. It's not patronizing to anyone, but it's made clear that there was a reason for that.
So he sent out with the sign of the childlike empress, which is two snakes biting each other in their tail. So it's a double Ouroboros. Do you want to describe it in another way?
That's about right.
I'd
say so. So
I thought
two snakes
you'd
each
say
bite.
two snakes 69ing.
I thought you were just asking me to clarify.
No, I'm asking you whether you made the
I think snake genitals are like halfway up their body. I'm pretty sure snakes have two dicks.
I'm gonna look that up later.
Or like two halves of one dick. I'm not sure how it works. Just look it up.
So he has a sign on him, which he wants to give to a hero to discover a cure. This sign, this Aurine as it's called, would protect someone because that's a sign of the childlike empress, and everyone in the world appreciates that, respects that. What he doesn't know is that the hero that the childlike empress is calling for appears to be a boy of Bastion's age.
And he's surprised to find this out when he meets him.
Yeah.
Anyway, snakes have two dicks, and he is sent out to find this boy, who it turns out is from the only community who the news of the childlike empress's illness hasn't quite reached. I'd also like to bring up one thing about the how are they referred to in here?
Greenskins.
Greenskins originally.
Grass people?
No, but that would be amazing.
I'm pretty sure.
Oh, they're from the grassy ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Singing Tree country, I believe. Now, in terms of how their aesthetic is described, their hairstyles, at one point it talks about this boy having some white face paint, and they are a community who are very much connected to nature in their way of life. They have societies who are brought up to hunt and fight, and they often rely on buffaloes as a resource.
So they're First
So
Nations.
they're Native Americans.
Yeah.
Except they're green.
Which, is the polar opposite color of red. So I'm not sure. Once again,
Parallel
I'm
universe.
not sure whether this is a good choice.
Yeah, because it's
with the
maybe
green.
maybe it's the parallel universe idea, but still, I see what you mean. I'm not sure if it was the intention, but it could be perceived as insensitive. Then again, the buffaloes are purple.
And real buffaloes aren't what is the opposite color of purple.
Yeah.
Real buffaloes aren't really yellow.
They're not. One thing I quite liked
I mean, he's green because the text of Fantastica is green and the text of the quote-unquote real world is red. So it makes sense for him to be a green character without it being a racist pun. Although I'm pretty sure that it is in fact a racist pun because men in Germany in the late 70s were insensitive about First Nations Americans. Big surprise. I wouldn't really hold this against him.
As in, he probably wouldn't have thought about it.
Yeah.
And that's true. Still, that's not really an excuse, but I highly doubt he would do this intentionally
He wouldn't, because
or
he seems
from
to,
coming from a racist place.
or just to get a rise out of people even.
Yeah. One thing I also noticed, it talks about how girls as well as boys were brought up with the same values to be brave, proud, and generous, and to be able to endure hardships and be courageous. And when the centaur gets to this place to find the boy, he asks where are the hunters and huntresses, and it's just old people of all genders and babies who are left behind at the camp. Now, this has been found to be true of many Native American groups, not discriminating by gender in terms of who hunts or fights, and rather leaving it up to ability. That is a fact within some tribes. But typically, when writers write about pretty much any culture that has hunters and gatherers and so on and so forth, they will ascribe one role to the men and constantly go on about women and children, women and children. Thankfully, you don't see that here.
Because what most writers do is take modern Western society and basically change
and
the custom.
try and fit every culture into that. Yeah.
Even like ancient Western society was different than modern Western society is. The best example for this would be ancient Greeks had other thoughts about sexuality than modern Greeks do.
But at the same time, whenever in the West we talk about that, even though it wasn't necessarily the case by historical accounts,
Yeah.
people will always try and make that into, oh yeah, it was just something that Greek men did whilst they were out fighting because they didn't have any women and they were bored. Firstly, I find it very, very hard to believe that there were no female soldiers. Secondly, there are accounts of serious relationships between men.
But apparently gay people fell from the sky sometime in the 1950s.
That's such an odd mental image.
Isn't this what the song It's Raining Men is about?
Is it?
By the way, that song was written by a couple of gay guys. It's just sung by two women. It's written by two gay guys, and it's kind of obvious that it is. We were talking about Atreyu's tribe. By the way, we haven't mentioned that yet. His name is Atreyu, and he is the hero of the first half of the book.
That's the boy, not the centaur.
Yeah, the centaur is called Chiron, but spelled differently, and the boy is called Atreyu.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes this quest, and because he takes this quest, he has to do this becoming a man ritual, which he was partaking in later.
It wasn't, in this case, necessarily to do with being a man.
No, but becoming an adult, becoming the...
Yes, so a rite of passage, but not a gendered rite of passage.
Thank you, that was the word I was looking for. Once again, second language speaker here. Which he apparently partakes in off-screen between the two halves of the book. But he gives that up to go on this journey for now to find a cure for the childlike empress. And what he finds to be the cure after a lot of searching, which we will talk about after I made this point, is that the childlike empress needs a new name and only a human child can give her one. And in Fantastica, there are no humans, so there are no human children. So you have to find a human child from somewhere else.
This is another thing that tripped me out is in the book you see contrasting elements of, for instance, when there's a scene much later on with ghosts in Fantastica, and then Bastian feels as though he senses ghosts there in the attic, and it's mentioned that this world exists, but that humans treat it as lies, treat it as something that doesn't exist. And I'll make another point about that later. I don't want to spoil it now. Yet at the same time, there's this element where humans create the world. For instance, by having to name her. It's almost as if the existence of the world feeds off the imagination of human beings. So it kind of goes back and forth a bit between is it real, is it not? And I guess that's a matter of belief that's up to the reader.
A lot of it is really ambiguous and
Yeah,
make you think about a
it
lot of
makes you
different
think.
stuff. It makes you think about so
That's
many
what I'm
different
saying.
things, about dreams, about religion, about the change of cultures, because this world has to be recreated. The childlike empress has to be given new names, which is about cultural shifts, I think.
Yes, and also I notice at times it seems as if he's writing about, say, the interactions of parallel universes that are as real as each other. Sometimes it seems like he's writing about a figment of the imagination. So it kind of makes you question possibilities. There's no one viewpoint on that given here.
Which I really like about this book.
Yeah,
It doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't say, you know what, this is what's going on. This is what I'm writing about. Even though this book is written to be targeted towards older children, I think, it doesn't just think the readership is dumb.
it gets you to that point where
Yeah.
you're asking yourself all these questions about the nature of how the worlds work, and you think, what is life?
Because one
It
thing,
fucks you up in places.
children are sometimes annoying, sometimes evil, but they aren't as stupid as some writers and movie makers especially think they are. And Michael Ende gets that.
Also, this works with the open-mindedness of
Yeah.
children.
It does.
For instance, many adults would perhaps be cynical about it or be set either one way of, yes, these things definitely exist, no, these things definitely don't, and therefore stick to one rigid viewpoint and miss what he did there.
Well, you've read this book for the first time as an adult person.
I mean, that's a generalization, but I'd say it's probably more likely for children to be open towards these questions
It's a bit like with,
and to catch it.
you know how the bones of children aren't as hard, as stubborn, as dense as they would be.
They're not
with
as rigid or dense. They're a lot.
rigid.
They're,
Thank you. The
they're a
word
lot
I'm
more
looking-
flexible.
I'm going to start over.
It-
You know,
children.
it's kind of like how the bones of children aren't as rigid as they are with adult people. Maybe it's the same with their mind, so it kind of still can get through a book which is made up of, how would you put that, these logic bombs and shit, without really noticing much, and just have it as food for thoughts as I had it now, as holy
So-
shit, what did I just read? I'm gonna have to philosophize 5 minutes about this.
It's a great read for kids, stoners, and philosophical thinkers.
Yeah, basically. And I mean, we have a philosophical thinker and a stoner. We should have a kid in this podcast talking about this with us.
We're
Or
basically
maybe that
kids.
would be a horrible idea
We're
because of our
basically kids.
language. Yeah, we're basically the kids.
Like we're 12.
We mentioned that a lot, that we are basically 12.
It's true.
So Atreyu goes off to find a cure, and as I said, in the end he finds out that he needs a human child for this. The world only has like fantasy creatures and normal animals. There are no humans in this world, which I found to be very, very interesting.
There are humanoid creatures, and
Lots of humanoid creatures, Ben.
the term human is actually mentioned in relation to this world.
When? How?
When describing the centaur as being half human and using racial terminology that would apply to humans.
I mean, that is because it has to be understandable to Bastian and us.
Yes. So it's unclear, but either there are no humans as we would know them in this world, or there are, but they're not made the central focus. They're not really brought up.
I'd say there aren't.
Possibly.
Because otherwise they could just get one of them and ask, yo, do you have a child? Can we speak to them? We need a new name.
I think the point of that is less that they have to be human in terms of physiology and genetics, but more that they have to come from the other side, which is made up of basically humans.
As the dominant species, at least.
Well, humans as the only creature who could give a name to another rational life form, I guess.
As far as we know, as far as we can understand.
That's what I mean. As far as we can understand, another animal could probably do it, but we wouldn't have that level of communication.
So Atreyu, as he tries to find out this fact that we now know, he stumbles across a lot of different characters who tell him their philosophies basically and what they know about the cure, if they know anything at all. The first creature he runs into is a creature
giant nihilist tortoise turtle
called the Ancient Mauler. One thing,
just before he meets her, by the way, there is a very sad part where he goes on his horse through a part called the Swamps of Sadness, and Atreyu is protected by the what is it?
The Aurine.
The ring, yeah. But his horse is not. So his horse gives in to the sadness and just wants to die and sinks into the swamps and dies. Warning, really sad bit.
And then he meets this giant tortoise called the Ancient Mauler, who George R. Martin named his pet turtle after. And I found this to be very, very interesting, because later on we find a lot of things that George R. Martin loves to write about. So this tortoise, who is living near the Swamps of Sadness, which I think explains a bit about her character.
He's told to go to the Tortoiseshell Mountain. The mountain is in fact just her.
Yeah.
And because of her sheer size, the shell just looks like one big mountain there.
And she really doesn't give much of a shit that Fantastica is being destroyed by the Nothing.
She's had enough.
She has.
Another potential Tolkien reference here.
Yeah, she speaks in a very Gollum-esque way.
She speaks to herself, referring to herself in third person? Second person as woman or old woman, and otherwise speaking in first person.
In German. Which is, you would disrespectfully call an older woman.
In this, she just addresses herself as old woman.
Or, you know who else she could be addressing as old woman? The childlike empress, who you know is the country.
Maybe.
And is dying of basically old age right now.
You just broke me. But yes, I think that's a possible reference.
I mean, it's like Gollum. Gollum also doesn't just talk to himself when he speaks in second person.
And he's also kind of developed that from constant isolation and...
Yeah, that is what we are led to believe when we meet him first, but then later we find that he might be talking to the Ring or Sauron or whoever. And I think it's the same thing with...
This is where what you said just now about her potentially talking to the childlike empress.
Yeah, who is not a clear-cut good guy. She is very, very much neutral.
That could quite possibly be the case. That would make sense.
I just came up with this right now, by the way. After thinking about Gollum, I just put that together into,
And apparently you don't do drugs.
I don't.
He doesn't do drugs. He just drinks sometimes. Very badly.
And then I say stupid things, apparently.
Like Dick Wizard. And that is a story for another time.
Which is something that Ende writes a lot in this book. He just builds up a plot point and then says, but that's a story and will be told another time. And this story probably won't be told on this podcast.
Watch me.
So Mauler isn't much of a help to Atreyu, so he goes on and just wanders through the world trying to find the cure. And then we come to a part which is a great read, but in hindsight, it's kind of just Ende wanting to get Atreyu from point A to point B and give him a dragon.
His dragon is my favorite character.
He's
in the
amazing,
whole book.
I know, but still, the chapter about Igramil the Many is just kind of, let's get him from here to there, give him Falkor. Because otherwise...
Also, Igramul is another character taken pretty much directly from Tolkien.
Not really, because Igramil...
The giant spider.
Yeah, Igramil appears to be a giant spider, which...
And is made up of lots of little babies.
Not baby spiders, but baby insects. Spiders aren't insects. And this is where I thought about George R. Martin again, who appears to be a fan of this. He loves to write about hive minds. And this is where I was introduced to the idea of a hive mind. Because we have a lot of insects acting as one, who then together can form a giant spider and later a giant head.
This went deep as hell. I didn't even think of that. I still think there was some inspiration, though.
There is. I mean, that the first thing he appears as is a spider might really have something to do with Tolkien. Also, maybe it has something to do with Bastian knowing Tolkien. Also, that Atreyu is a bit of a First Nations guy might be because Bastian, as someone living in Germany, would know the novels of Karl May, which you probably don't know about, but they are popular in Germany and they feature a First Nation character called Winnetou, who is kind of popular over here. So I think that because Bastian reads this book...
Has anyone... Oh, another thing earlier on, when Atreyu starts his mission and he is having dreams, and he mentions seeing, it's translated here as the glass tower of Erebor. It says the inhabitants caught and stored starlight and used them to make decorative objects that only they know the purpose of. Isn't that what the dwarves used to do under the mountain at one point?
It is. Also, in the second half of the book, which we will talk about next week, tune in for that, there is a dragon called Smirk, who might be a reference to Smog, but then again, many Slavic languages have a word for dragon along those lines. For example, apparently the
Maybe
Polish
that's
word
where
for
Tolkien
dragon
took
is...
it from as well.
Because Tolkien was really interested in linguistics, and apparently the Polish word for dragon is something a line of smoke, spelled S-O-M-K. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm going with smoke.
But no, the making of decorative objects and things, that was featured in one of the songs he wrote in the book, I believe.
The songs that the dwarves sing when they are sitting
in the full version.
About what the dwarves used to do before their culture kind of crumbled, yeah. Another Tolkien thing.
That was the first thing I thought of when I read that.
The Ivory Tower kind of sounds like an even more amazing Minas Tirith.
It does. Except I think the use of Ivory Tower might just be a tongue-in-cheek reference to her just being sat up there in her ivory tower.
It is, and also because...
She doesn't really come off that way, but still.
The German word for ivory is also a very, very fantasy-sounding word. Do you know the German word for ivory?
I don't.
It's Elfenbein, literally elf's leg.
Now that you mention it, it does.
Yeah. So, Atreyu with a bit of a... He basically talks himself out of that situation with Igramil the Many, who has captured a dragon and him. Talks himself to be teleported away, but poisoned. And he and this dragon, who is not like a fire-spewing evil dragon, but a Chinese luck dragon. They don't say Chinese, but he is very much Chinese.
The way he's described as looking, without the wings and everything.
Yeah, and also the way the original illustrations have it. In the movie, I'm gonna bitch about the movie for a second. They designed him very, very cute. But,
he is adorable.
But they managed to whitewash a dragon. Because there's
and
nothing...
then they made him look like the conventional Western or perhaps closer to the Northern European
No, 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 no,
image of
no.
a dragon.
No, they didn't do that. He just has a very, very dog-like adorable face, and they kind of don't focus on the
They took
body and
away
the
from-
movements so much.
So they took away from the classic image of a Chinese dragon.
Yeah, a bit. But they didn't turn him into
It's
a
amazing,
northern
and
dragon.
not amazing in a good way, that they managed to whitewash a dragon. It's kind of negatively impressive.
Yeah, also Atreyu is played by some white guy.
What? As if the reference to the First Nations wasn't obvious enough.
If someone is gonna nitpick this, I know that he might not be fully white because he has a bit of a more dark skin than I do, but he's very much not a First Nations person.
Or even if he has some blood in him, for instance. Honestly, the key point here is that Atreyu is very much raised within an indigenous community.
Yeah.
And in the book, at least, I see that as being the significance of that being more about the way of life.
Yeah, then having
Than
some
the
kind
genes.
of bloodline. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
the two of them then wake up to with two gnomes who heal them, who are called.
That's one way of putting it. They woke up with two gnomes. I'm just imagining them all in a bed smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, there's actually no love story at all, which is amazing.
The only people in a relationship are the two gnomes, and
They are
There's-
bickering old couple.
it's adorable.
It really is.
There is a mention later on about the Dark Princess and the werewolf, but that's a very brief.
Yeah, and there's also in the second part of the book someone is having a crush, but that is also a very minor and very annoying character who we will get into next week.
So the gnomes basically gave them an antidote to the poison, and are healing them now. They're basically an old couple. I won't say they're a married couple. That's unclear. So the male gnome is a very famous scientist, and Atreyu is probably one of the only people who haven't heard of him until he mentions that.
So this scientist gnome, Enjiwook, we only hear one person saying that he's a very famous scientist, which is Enjiwook himself.
And that's himself.
Yeah, so
And he lives in a
maybe
cave.
in the middle of nowhere.
And
And his wife doesn't take him seriously, so maybe
no, she's
he's
a doctor
just
of some
full of...
sort. What I did like is it was unclear to me because there's a lot of talk of them bickering and then her going back into the kitchen. Maybe she was just cooking because he was working on something. Maybe it was unintentional, but there is a lot of her going in and out of the kitchen.
Yeah, I actually noticed that too.
And
When I read that, I just thought, oh, yeah, Maddie is gonna
but
have a point
another
about
thing
this.
they did do on the positive side is when they were bickering and ordering each other around, normally either he would give in or they'd both boss each other around quite a bit, rather than it just being her told to shut up the whole time. And also, she was definitely presented as the more logical thinking and rational one, whereas he was the one admitting that, but sometimes saying that she was too practical and too down to earth, and she would criticize his emotional outbursts. Now, this is the polar opposite of how society at large stereotypes thought processes and codes them into neat little pink and blue boxes. It is, of course, total bullshit, but that's what we're led to believe by so-called scientific studies. Evolutionary psychology is a pseudoscience.
After meeting the gnomes, Atreyu goes to the Southern Oracle, who can't help him much, and is then destroyed by the Nothing.
As in the disembodied voice.
Yeah, the disembodied voice, the Southern Oracle, can't really help him much.
Should I bring up that it is a Shakespeare reference, isn't it?
What is?
When the Oracle talks in rhymes, and I don't know whether this is in yours, but in one line she says, she does identify herself as a she at one point.
Yeah.
Over hill and dale, over wood and stream.
That sounds familiar. Where's that from?
Over hill, over dale, the rest of it, Midsummer Night's Dream. I
There
suppose that's
is.
not in the German version, is it?
It might be. I haven't caught that because I haven't seen or read Midsummer Night's Dream in literally 10 or 12 years. But
No, I
it
caught that
might be
one.
because there is a clearer Shakespeare reference later on, which we will talk about next week.
If I got the wrong play, feel free to tell me. Pretty sure that was the right one, though.
It probably is. I mean, if you would link this book to any Shakespeare play, you'd have to go with Midsummer Night's Dream.
Oh,
Just
it's the
because of this.
monologue from the fairies in the Midsummer Night's Dream. The rhythm used here is actually similar to that.
Similar or the same? Doesn't she? I think she talks in iambic pentameter, doesn't she?
Yes, yes, it is the same. I had to have a look at that.
Do you have like. In German, we have a sentence which we remember to see what is iambic pentameter just to use it on. Do you have one of those sentences as well?
I tend to recognize it, but not that I know of.
In Germany, we say die Axt im Haus erspart den Zimmermann, which means an axe in the house saves you a call to the carpenter, and we use that to test if something is in Shakespeare style, basically.
This is, though. It was quite a fitting time for him to throw that in there.
Should we talk about the doors leading up to the Southern Oracle?
We could.
Or gates? How did they translate that? As doors or as gates?
Oh, look for it. Gates.
Gates. So the first gate, two sphinxes, who are known for riddles, looking at each other. Giant stone sphinxes. And it lets some people pass and some people don't pass. And of course, because those are sphinxes, it's a riddle. And it's not only a riddle to people inside the book, but also to us. And the riddle is, how do people pass through there? I don't really know how to get through that, but my idea, which I had today, is maybe you get through there if you have someone reading about you. And if you are going through there, but you aren't the protagonist.
When he sees the mirror gate,
Yes.
that's kind of where the connection between both worlds begins.
Yes, because in the mirror gate, they see each other.
This is the twist that fucked me up again, because in the beginning I was thinking this is a great book so far, but because up until this point I was thinking when we're in Fantastica, so with those, in your case it would be the green text.
Yeah, the green text.
I was just thinking that okay, that's the author narrating what Bastian is reading.
Yeah.
If he could actually get into this world, it would kind of be more engaging for me.
Mm-hmm.
I did not see this coming.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't think the worlds were going to. I didn't think this was going to happen, and it did, and it fucked me up again. I was like, so I'm reading the book that he's reading, or am I reading about that? And then this fucked me up.
Then Atreyu forgets who he is. In another reference to ancient Greek stuff, this time how Odysseus tricks the giant Cyclops. Also, Atreyu forgets his name, which helps him later, and before that, Igramul transformed into a Cyclops for a while.
I didn't even make that connection till you mentioned it. I just thought something strange. Now, the next bit is about Bastian having read the last part. So you read the part about where Atreus sees a fat little boy wrapped in blankets in the attic. And this tripped me out as well. The next bit is him reading about himself.
Yeah, it is.
Kind of that walking over your own grave feeling.
And then later on, and this is the part that fucked me up so much, when then later on, after everything seems to be lost and the world is nearly dying, the childlike empress goes to this, what's he called in the English translation? The guy she wants to speak, the chronist of Fantastica.
Oh, the old man.
Old Man of the Wandering Mountain?
Yes.
Alright, so they just translated it literally. He begins to read the book you are holding in your hands, beginning with Karl Konrad Coriander backwards.
He does.
I completely forgot about this. I just looked at this book
No,
and
and then Bastian hears him reading about him.
yeah.
Here's the old man reading about him.
And by the way, the
And
book
then he
mentions
talks about a mirror reflected in itself.
Yes.
And then you just look at the book with all the twists and turns of who's reading what and go, yeah,
And also
that bit fucks you up.
I think that is where the time sink is. Because to read this first half of the book, it took me around 2.5 hours. But I'm a kind of fast reader. I think at age 10, everyone could get through the first half of this book if they did it in one sitting in maybe 6 hours. I'm not sure. And I think it takes him longer than that. It is longer than 6 hours of him reading
Yeah.
there, isn't it? Because he reads from the morning into the night.
Because it mentions every time
because
an
he
hour
reads
has
a lot
passed,
more.
the church bell goes.
The school bell, not the church bell.
Well, I had such a weird thought. What if a chubby little boy around the age of 10 to 12 picks up this book, gets a bunch of grey blankets, and goes and reads it in the school attic? How much would that fuck them up?
How would someone get into that situation?
I don't know if this is a thought experiment.
I mean,
It doesn't
this
matter.
book is a thought experiment. This book is basically introducing children to every possible thought experiment and religious, philosophical shower thought ever. I mean, philosophy and religion are basically just the...
Shower thoughts.
Yeah, shower thoughts written down in books. And I love religion and philosophy. I don't mean to take anything away from them, but that is basically what they are. And sometimes after I said that, I noticed that sounds like I'm being mean towards them, but I'm not. The same thing as when I called you an extremist and didn't mean it to be a bad thing.
You did. Can you be an extremist in a neutral way?
You can't be an extremist in a neutral way, but you can be an extremist in a non-violent way.
Are you necessarily an extremist if your supposed extremism is less to do with your actual views and more to do with how they sit in relation to those of society at large?
It is. By the way, I know that the word extremist means someone who is violent about their thoughts, and what I meant to say is that your views are kind of fringe sometimes.
Having something that's completely subversive to the social norm could be seen as radical, but to be extremist, somebody would have to have a very black and white view. It's not necessarily relative to any norm.
How did we get here?
Did we just go down the semantics rabbit hole?
We did. We shouldn't have done this.
Let's leave it in because it's a good point.
It is. Getting back to the actual book, before we are wrapping this up for this week, with Bastian understanding that they are actually talking about him and giving the childlike empress a new name, which is Moonchild. Which is less silly in German, because at least in German there is no space in that word. It's one word, not two.
Still, whether it's one word or two, Moonchild, in quite archaic usage, was a term used to mean somebody who's perceived as crazy. I guess it's kind of similar to the use of the term lunatic.
Yeah, because...
no
lunatic comes from luna, which means moon. One thing I thought about this time is German is the only language where the moon is male and the sun is female. Usually, in most languages and most cultures,
there are a few other lesser-known languages and mythologies where it's the same. But
usually, the moon is female and the sun is male. It's the case in English, even though you guys don't really use gendered articles. It's the case in English, Italian, Spanish, and even Dothraki.
And people give that kind of symbolism so much unwarranted thought that it leads to a bunch of made up gender norms that are then put forward as some kind of spiritual truth. Weird. But if there's even one language or one culture where it's the other way around,
It really doesn't make
surely
it.
surely that means there's not a consensus, so that debunks it.
Yes.
Speaking of references to cultures and mythologies, in Spook City there's the
Yeah.
werewolf.
Yes.
Is
Where
the
was
chained wolf a possible Norse mythology reference?
It probably is. Also, he's chained by Gaia, even though she's spelled differently. Is the Titan in the Greek mythology?
I see that. So he's sort of mixed the
It's
two in this
yeah.
case.
I mean, they mixed every
Like, they
mythology
mix everything.
too.
That's the case with most fantasy novels that reference mythology.
But he makes it a bit clearer than most people do. By the way, Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology book is amazing. If you get the chance, read it. It's good.
Mixing elements of different mythologies that readers will be familiar with is a great way of world building. Because let's say there's just one that's referenced a lot. It's not very helpful when there are different races and there's a whole world in question. So it's a very good technique, I think. Yeah.
I had a minor point about the werewolf.
Yeah.
He mentions that he can walk between
Yeah,
this
he's
world
neither
and
from
our
one
world and doesn't belong in either way, so he doesn't care about Fantastica being destroyed. What is he in our world? Is he a wolf or is he a man?
He's a werewolf still. He
So-
talks about how if Atreyu crosses over to the human world,
Yeah.
he'll turn into something else. He says, what is this something else? And finally gets the answer out of him, and he says they're called lies. So
Which I think-
that's a reference to how in his world the werewolf is a real being and recognized as such, or at least in Fantastica. In the human world, he would be existing there. He would sort of have his consciousness in the human world, but not be recognized as a thing, and constantly
No,
have
that
humans
is what-
talk about him as
What would happen to
something
Atreyu?
that
Gmorg the werewolf would be able to cross over because he's
he would.
the other beings in Fantastica would be lies over here. He wouldn't, and my question is, would he
So
be
he
aware?
wouldn't. He could.
Would he be
As
a
in-
wolf or would he be a man?
I'm not sure. It's unclear. He could probably be any of those, but because in this world in Fantastica he's a werewolf, he will probably still have some sort of feeling towards how such creatures are viewed in the human world.
I mean, he's not just a wolf; he's a werewolf. So my question is the
That's my
human there
point.
and the wolf? Yeah, and the wolf there. That makes
I'd
sense,
say-
right?
I'd say he could be either, but he'd still be aware of how humans view what he really is as a lie. It wouldn't be apparent to the humans, but it would affect him.
I think this is all we have for the first half of the book. Next week we will talk about the other 13 chapters of this book and how Bastian has his adventures in Fantastica, how he meets Atreyu, and all the thoughts we have about what happens to him there.
And we'll also tell you what happens right at the end of this first half. It'll be
Yeah.
more fitting in the second half.
But that's another story and will be told another time.